Windsurf is one of the most insane startup stories that I have run across in a couple of decades hanging out around Silicon Valley and tech. We are going to talk about it, and we're going to start by telling you the story of Windsurf so you can get a sense of how long this saga has been going on. 2021, company was founded as ExaFunction by MIT graduates Varun Mohan and Douglas Chen. The original focus was GPU optimization tools, so even then they were in the AI space. They then pivoted to AI coding assistants and launched Codeium. 2024, they raised Series C. The valuation at the time was somewhere between 1.25 billion and 1.3 billion, and the total raised to date is 243 million, almost $250 million. Investors at the time of the Series C include Founders Fund and Kleiner Perkins. Late in 2024, after the Series C, they had a major rebrand from Codeium to Windsurf, and they launched an AI native development environment with the Cascade agent, intended to be a competitor to Cursor. Everyone was seeing Cursor take off. This was the point we were seeing Bolt take off. Lovable was starting to take off. Windsurf was positioned in that ecosystem as a full stack app builder. It had a free tier, and then it had a, I think, $15 per seat premium at the time versus Cursor's $20. They're clearly undercutting on price. 2025 is where things get interesting. In Q1, on March 11th, Windsurf achieves FedRAMP-High certification, which, if you don't know what it is, count yourself blessed. It's the first AI coding tool to be approved for U.S. government workloads. That's what FedRAMP-High means. That gives it obviously a major leg up in regulated sectors, and it plans to take that all the way to the bank. Early in April, Windsurf hits reportedly $100 million in ARR, far behind Cursor, but still clearly in the number 2 position. It is the lift to the Uber played by Cursor. This is up from $40 million just a few months before, and they claim 1 million plus developers using the platform with 350 plus enterprise customers. One of the things I will call out here anecdotally is I hear Windsurf more with enterprise customers than I hear it with individual engineers. And I think that's a very interesting flip from Cursor, because Cursor I hear from engineers all the time. And I hear it as, yes, they're going to consider it, but it's not that surprising if you consider the ubiquitous number 1. Windsurf has better name recognition with decision makers and punches above its weight in decision-making circles. And I think that's really interesting, and that will continue to play out as we continue the story here. April 16th, 2025, Bloomberg breaks the OpenAI acquisition news. The reported price, $3 billion, all cash deal. It would be OpenAI's largest acquisition ever. We are at a stage in AI and private companies where you can have multi-billion-dollar acquisitions by a startup of another startup. That is how big AI is right now. Obviously, if you're at Windsurf, you begin doing the math on your equity. You want to say, like, how much do I get? What is my vest date? Everyone goes and looks at their RSUs. I've done this sort of song and dance before. They do the math. They try and come up with something. I will tell you, as someone who has lived through these things a couple of times, do not do the math yourself. You will end up with a number that is by definition incorrect, because you will forget the taxes, or you will forget the fees, or you will forget the delay in the payout due to some sort of clause that they write into the contract. There are all kinds of ways to change the math that are legal. It is just, there's no point doing the math yourself. Just don't bother. Early May, the letter of intent is signed and the exclusive negotiation window begins. Internal memos at this point leak, showing that there's a plan to fold Windsurf into the ChatGPT dev suite. This is also when Anthropic is going to start withdrawing Claude from Windsurf, causing a lot of bad feelings from the developers using Windsurf. I was a user of Windsurf at the time. I was very unhappy that Claude left, but I get it. If you have something called ChatGPT Dev Suite coming, the last thing you want is to let Claude's output tokens and Claude's data into that environment. Because really what you're doing when you're coding is you have an AI writing code and you have an engineer rewarding that one way or another, either telling the code output, hey model, great job on the code output, good job, thumbs up, and then you have a reward signal, or hey, this didn't work, can you try it this way? And then you have a correction signal. Both are highly valuable signals if you are in the AI arms race. and Anthropic did not want those signals going to ChatGPT. So OpenAI reportedly agreed to definitive terms with Windsurf around this ChatGPT Dev Suite idea. May 6th, 2025, a definitive agreement is announced, which is a step beyond just the negotiation window and the letter of intent, a step beyond the reported price negotiated initially. The $3 billion price was confirmed again. This is a rare case where the price didn't change. And Windsurf employees rightly are celebrating at this point. They think they've got it made, but we aren't done yet. Early June, negotiations hit a major snag. Microsoft raises IP concerns. Under 2023's agreement that OpenAI signed with Microsoft back when OpenAI had many fewer cards than it holds today, Microsoft has rights to all OpenAI tech, including acquisitions, and it looks like Satya Nadella played his hand. The rumor is that OpenAI did not want to give the IP for Windsurf to Microsoft. There has been, I don't want to call it a divorce, that sounds dramatic. There has been a soft separation between Microsoft and OpenAI. Let's use that term. Very polite. We're all adults here. And there has been a little bit of tension, and this is an example of that tension. Basically, OpenAI has become more powerful in the relationship since the agreement was signed. They're flexing their wings. In this case, they flexed their wings and said, you know what? We're acquiring Windsurf, and no, Microsoft, we don't want you to have the IP. And Satya basically said, talk to my Microsoft lawyers, which if you've ever talked with Microsoft lawyers, you don't want to do. So at the end of the day, Satya was right. Microsoft had legal rights. GitHub Copilot directly competes with Windsurf, and he was right to worry about it. And Microsoft refused to grant an exception to their IP rights. June 3, Anthropic formally restricts Windsurf's Claude access. This is during the OpenAI exclusivity period, and they are probably doing it to sort of see if they can scotch the deal in addition to the token impact that I discussed earlier. As Jared Kaplan put it, it would be odd for us to sell Claude to OpenAI. That's exactly sort of the frame that I made, but it's much more succinct. So this forces Windsurf users to migrate to competitors. Now you have a deal that isn't done yet, and you have users leaving the platform. Anthropic is quietly happy because OpenAI is kind of getting screwed on this deal. Mid to late June, things begin to unravel. OpenAI desperately attempts to restructure the deal. The Windsurf board begins to get worried about losing enterprise and government contracts as their core product starts to collapse because Claude is starting to pull out. Claude is, if you don't know, one of the best coding agents out there. The deal is effectively stalled. It's not publicly dead, and there's a difference there. July 11th, that was this Friday, 7 a.m. Pacific, the OpenAI exclusivity period officially expires. No renewal is announced, and the deal is confirmed to be under review, which is code for in trouble. By the morning, news breaks that the OpenAI deal has collapsed. Microsoft's IP issues are cited as the primary cause, although if you look into it and you look at Anthropic's power move, I would argue that's also a contributing factor. If you start to lose the most powerful coding agent, it's hard to make the case that you're a very powerful and $3 billion worth development platform. This underscores the tension between model makers and the tool layer right above them. The Information, which is a tech publication, now reports talks have ended on tech sharing concerns. By 3 p.m. that day, Friday, July 11th, Google has announced a $2.4 billion deal. They got on the phone right away. They structure a reverse acqui-hire with a licensing deal. Now, I have wondered whether this is effectively a way to get around FTC examination of the deal because it's not technically an acquisition. It is a very unusual acquisition format that isn't an acquisition because it's an acqui-hire. They do not acquire the company. Instead, they hire the CEO, Varun Mohan, and the co-founder, Douglas Chen, and about 40 of the best engineers, R&D employees. They all get paid bank. They split between them $2.4 billion just for the talent and a non-exclusive license to Windsurf's tech. Non-exclusive, you understand. Mostly that is $2.4 billion for 42 people. that's a good deal. Like, divide out those numbers. That is a good deal. The remaining 250,000 employees, the remaining 250 employees are not included in this deal, don't know about this deal, aren't participating in this deal. Their equity is more or less worthless, because what they get is $100 million in remaining cash in the company, and they don't have the option to compete on their tech exclusively because Google can now license their tech, and they don't have their best R&D employees, they don't have their founders, and they are left screwed, for lack of a better term. Now, I will say not everyone views it that way. I thought that engineering maven, Gergely Orosz, had a really good point when he said, honestly, as bad as it may be if you're in it, the outcome for Windsurf across the board is better than most startup outcomes. And he is right. Most startup outcomes, 90% plus, go to the wall. They fail. The startup equity is worth zero. The fact that you got paid and that some of your employees and your founders got something is still better than the zero outcome you would expect on most startups. That may be true, but I think what Gergely misses is the trust-breaking nature of this choice. There has been an implicit contract in the Valley where founders are in it for the long haul with their companies. If that starts to break down because the AI salary pressures are so insane that it is better to be an employee than to be a founder at a major R&D firm like Google for AI, we have cracks in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. It does not sit well with me that a founder would be rewarded for walking away from their startup and leaving their employees in the lurch. So as much as I agree with Gergely that on paper this is better than the outcome the company could have had, I don't think it is a good thing that builds trust in the ecosystem long term. I think it's negative for the ecosystem. I don't think Google did a service to the Valley here. And I get maybe why they felt they had to do it, because Google, unlike smaller startups like OpenAI, would not be under FTC scrutiny the way that Google is. And so Google had to tread very carefully. And that may be part of why the Acqui-Hire deal happened. But we aren't done yet. By the evening, Logan at Google, Logan Kilpatrick, tweets a welcome, and everything is official. Controversy starts to explode. Details of the structure leak on July 12th, Saturday. The 2.4 billion leaks, vested employees got cash payouts, employees with less than 12 months tenure get nothing, which is actually very typical in startups. And the remaining company has no core team, which I discussed. In the afternoon on Saturday, it's announced that Jeff Wang will be the interim CEO. The company states their SaaS focus will continue and emphasizes the Google license is non-exclusive. Social media explodes. Lot of commentary on employees counting out sort of their rewards they were going to get and then getting nothing. Channel partners begin to pull support for Windsurf. Hashtag Windsurf betrayal starts to trend. By July 13th, Sunday, more internal details leak. Apparently, there was a rambling CEO Zoom speech announcing the deal. Employee anger begins to peak. By the afternoon, industry analysts are weighing in predictions of bankruptcy within 12 months. Remaining company called a zombie. Enterprise customers advised to migrate. This is all very bad if you are still at Windsurf, right? For the 250 employees, this has been a weekend from hell. And I cannot emphasize this enough. I would not want to be you guys. I am hoping that you are in a better spot now, and we're going to get to why. July 14th, Monday, Cognition Labs, the makers of Devon, announced an acquisition of the remaining parts of Windsurf. This includes their IP, their product, their trademark, their brand, their training data, and all remaining 250 employees. The key difference here is there is 100% employee financial participation, full vesting, acceleration, and waived cliffs. In other words, Cognition Labs saw what Google did and said, we have an opportunity to step in as the good guy here. We can be the good guy. We will acquire Windsurf. We will bring everybody aboard. It doesn't matter whether you vested or not, if you've worked less than a year or not, which, by the way, when you're in a startup and it's hiring like on a power law like this, most of your employees by definition are less than a year in because you're hiring so fast. So I would expect from most of these employees, waiving the cliff was a big deal. Essentially, Cognition Labs makes them whole where Google screwed them over. And it's a nice move for them because they're basically saying we have an agentic developer in Devon. Now we have tools for a development environment in Windsurf. In theory, if they can get themselves sorted out, they still have that FedRAMP-High certification, which could get Devon into government work. There's some upside here for Cognition. It wasn't just that they were being charitable. Now, of course, the pricing isn't disclosed. I can't imagine it was $3 billion, not least because Cognition doesn't have the money that OpenAI had. By afternoon, more conflicting reports start to surface. Windsurf reposts the Cognition announcement. The show is going on. Cognition emphasizes that we're friends with Anthropic again, meaning that they think they're going to be able to get Claude back into Windsurf to revive it. We will have to see how this all goes. At the end of the day, I want to draw a couple of lessons. One, this is underscoring the skewed nature of the talent wars and the power law for talent wars in Silicon Valley in a way I have never seen before. If you can pay a founder who is already a multimillionaire so much money that that founder finds it worthwhile to abandon their fiduciary responsibilities to their company, potentially expose themselves to a lawsuit, because there's some board level responsibility here to work at the best interests of the company. And it's arguably not the best interests of the company to walk away from the company and join Google for millions of dollars. So they're exposing themselves to that. And on top of that, they are frankly breaking a code of honor in the Valley that has been true for decades. That's still worth it to them because Google's paying them so much. And that underscores how massive these pay packages are. Over like a weekend ago, Zuck got I think the head of AI at Apple, which I don't know why you would go to Apple for that, but he got the head of AI at Apple for $200 million, which is more than Tim Cook at Apple makes, I think, depending on how you count the equity vesting. Anyway, it's a ton of money. When you make that much, you break the usual incentives in the Valley. If you can be a $200 million employee, why would you ever found? And I think that we are starting to see some of that dislocation. The second thing that I want to call out is that there is massive dislocation in the tool layer, and that we should view coding agents, the coding environment, as the tip of the iceberg for the disruption that model makers can pose. Because at the end of the day, if you are a model maker and you believe good models will get better over time, you should be able to eat more and more of workflows over time just by delivering good models. And you can do something like, I don't know, Claude Code, which is frankly just a terminal, and compete with Cursor. You're going to eat some of these tools for lunch over time, and you kind of don't care. And so we are seeing this tectonic struggle between the tool makers that are trying to build on top of this model maker tech and the model makers who are really incentivized to grab as much territory as they can. Model makers hold the cards here, as you saw with Claude cutting off access to Windsurf, but they don't hold all the cards. And so one of the things that's super interesting about this dynamic is that it's sort of a 2/3, 1/3 situation where you might say that 2/3 of the power sits with the model makers, but the tool layer has 1/3 of the power. At the end of the day, Windsurf still got acquired. They're still going to be a viable company. The FedRAMP-High certification did not go to Claude Code. It went to Windsurf. And so tool makers are still going to get their day in the sun. They're still going to get their dollars. But the way they negotiate the relationship with model makers is going to continue to be fraught, because the model makers have a lot of incentives to make sure that their models continue to get better. And the tool makers are going to have to negotiate those incentives while still serving customers. And that's sort of the story. That tension is the story of Windsurf over the last couple months. The third thing I want to call out is that we are going to see more and more agents in code. And again, that is a cutting edge tip of the spear for where we will see them other places. The reason code is leading the way here is because code is easy to reward. Code runs or it doesn't. It's easy for model makers to figure out whether their code worked or it didn't. And that's true for development environments. It's true if you launch your own agent. Cursor recently launched their own model that codes. And it's true if you have an agent that runs on code. All of the stuff we're seeing in the development environment now, this whole conversation around Windsurf, is an early indicator of where the rest of the industry is going, because it's an easier problem for AI to solve. When you think about the next 12 to 15 to 18 months, Devon acquiring Windsurf means more work on agents in code. It means the agentic agenda, for lack of a better term, not that it's a secret cabal, but the agentic goal of like getting AI agents with tools and policy and guidance to actually do important coding work, that is moving forward. Devon is, I would expect, going to be fully integrated into Windsurf, and we're going to see more of this hybridized motion where you have both a development environment and an agent management environment for engineers in the same place. Cursor's heavily going that way as well. That is going to lead to new surfaces, new experiences. The mobile environment has become a much bigger deal for developers than it ever was. It used to be you could just build for the desktop because always developers would be on the desktop. Not anymore. If you're running agents, you can be on your mobile. There's a lot of really weird implications, and that's very typical of what happens when you have an underlying technology shift like we are all living through right now. Fundamentally, the story of Windsurf is the story of the evolution of LLMs from being just sort of autocompletes for coders to being genuine coding agents to being genuine assistants in code, and what happens when valuations start to shake loose at that point. That's why OpenAI went for Windsurf in the first place. That's why they got the FedRAMP-High certification. That's why Devon went for them. And that is also why that tech is why Google needed them, because Google doesn't have a development environment that is popular with developers. And if they're going to get Gemini to win long term, they need it. So that's the story of Windsurf. I am sure there will be more to the story. It's been one of the most eventful of the last couple of decades, I would say. And I'm curious. What do you think you would do in Windsurf's shoes?